My name is Kang from South Korea. I like to talk about Commonwealth rent and Commonwealth basic income. Because of my English, I write in full sentence. Yeah. No, not this. This one. Yeah. Okay. In this paper, after a theoretical review of Commonwealth and Commonwealth rent, we'll examine the need for a Commonwealth dividend. In this paper, Commonwealth comes interchangeably and basic income and dividend interchangeably. Commonwealth in this paper it is defined normatively as assets or resources that should belong to all members of the community. So even if it actually exists in the form of private wealth, it should be the Commonwealth. That is definition of Commonwealth. And we will skip this part. Commonwealth, natural Commonwealth and social Commonwealth. In this paper, we will focus on natural Commonwealth because social Commonwealth is a little more complicated. Commonwealth is different from public goods. Traditionally, in economics, wealth or goods are categorized like this table, whether it is excludable or non-excludable, whether it is rival or non-rival. So according to this table, wealth can be one of the four categories, but Commonwealth can belong to any categories. So it is different from public goods. For example, public land is public goods, and private land is private goods, and community land is maybe common pool resources, and golf club land is belong to club goods. And consider a fish. I like to talk about the inappropriateness of the concept of a rivalry for Commonwealth. Consider a fish caught from a lake in a village. This fish is rival because if one person eats it, no one else can eat it. However, if the lake is abundant with fish, there is nothing stopping someone else in the village from catching and eating another fish of the same kind. Focusing on the lake, one person's consumption of fish in the lake does not constrain another person's consumption of fish. Another way to look at this is that it is not the specific fish in the lake that people enjoy, but the service that the lake provides, the service of supply of fish. The role of the lake is similar to that of the road. The lake is performing the service of supplying fish, and the question of economic importance is whether this service is abundant enough to be enjoyed by everyone in the village. And also, excludability is an institutional concept. Excludability occurs when people can be prevented from consuming something by not paying for it or by not being a member. Excludability is driven by institutional rather than physical properties of the good. Privately owned resources are excludable, unowned resources are not, and publicly owned resources depend on government decision. For example, knowledge is not excludable on its own, but it becomes excludable when a system of intellectual property rights is introduced. The ocean is non-excludable, but it becomes excludable when fishing rights are assigned to fishermen. Since both natural commonwealth can be made both excludable and non-excludable, categorizing a commonwealth by excludability is not very helpful in understanding the nature of natural commonwealth. For this reason, we will modify the concept of rivalry to apply to commonwealth. We will call it relative scarcity or abundance to avoid confusion with the concept of rivalry used to categorize goods. A commonwealth is with relative scarcity is defined as a commonwealth for which the marginal cost of providing or harvesting the service to satisfy the current demand is increasing. A relatively abundant commonwealth has a zero or constant cost of providing the service. In the previous example, fish in a lake are not relatively scarce because the second consumer's cost of fishing is the same as the first consumer's cost of fishing. A commonwealth that is only available to a group of population can be thought of having an infinitely increasing marginal cost for the rest groups of the population, so it is relatively scarce. The natural commonwealths need to be also categorized by renewability. Renewable commonwealths are those where nature can maintain or increase its service on its own within an economically meaningful time frame, while non-renewable commonwealths are those where it cannot. So if we adopt a new renewable and non-renewable, and relatively scarce and relatively abundant, we can categorize natural commonwealth into 4 categories like this. So land for housing, it's relatively scarce, but renewable, it's fixed. But minerals in demand are relatively scarce and non-renewable. Oxygen, sunlight, water in water-rich countries are relatively abundant and renewable. So we can categorize like these 4 groups. D is not important. We have no interest in D. When A and B, so relatively scarce commonwealth. In a competitive market, the price formed is determined by the marginal cost of the last unit traded. However, because it is scarce, the marginal cost of the last unit is greater than the previous unit. The seller of the previous unit of commonwealth earns an excess profit over his marginal cost. This is the economic rent. This rent arises because of the natural scarcity of commonwealth. In case of C, C is this relatively abundant and renewable. Renewable and non-scarce natural commonwealth in C of table 2 generally does not generate rent. However, if property rights are established for this commonwealth and access is restricted, it can be sold at a price above the marginal cost by artificially limiting the amount sold. This is the monopoly rent. This monopoly rent differs from the scarcity rent generated by the relative scarce commonwealth A or B in its market conditions, efficiency, and cost. So scarcity rent generates in competitive market, but only monopoly rent only in the monopolistic market. And the scarcity rent is efficient, but monopoly rent is inefficient. So one is from the natural scarcity, and the other is artificial scarcity. The source of Commonwealth rent is the productive power of Commonwealth. For example, a factory in a water-rich location will be more productive than a factory in a water-poor location. The location of the Commonwealth is independent of the labor or contribution of the seller or producer of that goods. Since the Commonwealth belongs to all, it is not fair to monopolize its productive power in the hands of a few. The plunder of the commons is the act of privatizing the Commonwealth in pursuit of Commonwealth rent. Enclosure and privatization are main forms. Some commons, such as sunlight, wind, data, are difficult to privatize due to their non-excludable physical properties. One way to enclose such a commonwealth is to utilize private assets that are inextricably linked to it. Data accumulated on the internet is stored in the platform company's cloud, so it is difficult to access it except through the cloud, which is the private wealth. Another important example of using private wealth to monopolize commonwealth rent is solar power. Sunlight is clearly a commonwealth and cannot be excluded, but we need land to receive it. Land is supposed to be a common good, commonwealth, but in reality, much land is privatized. If landowners can enclose the sunlight commonwealth and capture a significant portion of solar power revenues, inequality increases in the transition to renewable energy. In the case of relative scarce commonwealth, A and B, if a price ceiling is implemented, it becomes inefficient. So I want to skip this part. But in the case of commonwealth C, which is relatively abundant and renewable, price ceiling can increase fairness and efficiency by allowing more transactions to take place at lower prices. So maybe 5 minutes, I have to skip the more economic part. So I want to explain one more thing. Sustainability is defined as the state of affairs in which the well-being of future generation is not less than the well-being of the current generation. Renewability is a physical criterion, while sustainability is an economic criterion. It is possible to harvest non-renewable commonwealth and still make it sustainable. This can be done by adhering to the Hartwig principle. According to the principle, all rent from non-renewable commonwealth should be invested as capital to maintain it in perpetuity, and each generation should consume only the revenue generated, yearly revenue generated from the invested capital. The Alaska Permanent Fund is a good example of converting non-renewable oil resources into sustainable capital. So keeping commonwealth fair, efficient, and sustainable. So I will go to the slide like this. In case of Commonwealth A, the principle is to tax the rent and distribute the revenue as basic income. So it is relatively scarce, so only a small group of people earn money from the Commonwealth, so we have to tax the rent and distribute to all older people. And in case of B, it is non-renewable. So we have to keep the Hartwig principle. Take the rent to create a permanent fund and distribute annual income, only annual income as basic income. This is case of Commonwealth B. And C is relative artificial scarcity monopoly. So distribute it for free. But keep in mind to manage it so that it remains renewable. So it may be the case of basic income in kind. Yeah. In one of the sessions yesterday, there was an argument that carbon dividends are unsustainable because they get smaller and smaller, and that they they give incentive emissions because the larger the emission, the larger the amount of carbon dividend. However, this second argument is based on a misunderstanding of carbon dividend. The higher the carbon tax, the lower the carbon emission. If we want to reduce emission quickly, we need to raise carbon tax quickly. Raising carbon tax also raises energy prices and reduces people's real income. So people oppose raising carbon tax quickly. That is the big problem. However, if the carbon tax revenue is distributed as a carbon dividend, middle and low income people will see a small increase in their real income because the carbon dividend will be larger than the increased energy expenditure for the low income people. This could make people favor policy the sharply increased carbon tax. So a carbon dividend is not a license to kill the earth, but a way to stop killing the earth quickly. Yeah. And there is, yes, this is the, yeah. Yesterday I quickly inserted the 3 slides to answer the argument. The long-term disappearance of carbon tax revenue is a limitation of carbon dividend. However, there is another Commonwealth basic income in the energy transition. In South Korea, it is now called Sunshine Pension. It is a policy in which government takes back a portion of rent generated by the renewable energy industry and distribute it as basic income. In South Korea, Sinang County, residents of 5 islands receive currently a sunshine pension of $400 per year. By 2030, the county plans to provide $4,500 annually wind pension to all residents. The Democratic Party, led by Jae-myung Lee, and Basic Income Party, led by Hye In-young, are working on a plan to nationalize the sunshine and wind pension. We have to keep in mind the ecological basic income. There are 2 kinds of, not only carbon dividend, but sunshine and wind pension. We may call it sunshine and wind basic income. So the natural commonwealth, one is air, the other is sunshine or wind. One becomes smaller, decreases, but one becomes increases. The objective of the carbon dividend is not increasing people's real income, but preventing real income from falling for the majority of people. But sunshine pension, its objective is to increasing real income for the majority of people. Yeah, thank you.